invocation by myself.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for every day that you bless us with. Please be with this board as we make our decisions tonight. Let it be for your glory. And Lord, please watch over our citizens and any that are suffering or struggling this time. Embrace them with your encouragement and strength, perseverance, love. And Lord, a special prayer tonight for the deputy involved in the shooting and the victim. Please be with the victims' families. Keep them strengthened and encouraged. And particularly be with the deputy. I'm sure he or she is going through a lot. Please embrace them with your love and encouragement and strengthen. In your name and glory we pray. Amen.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, board members. First item is the approval of your agenda. There are 3 items in the bullpen. One is the appointment of Gregory Bell to the Transportation Committee. Second is the appointment of Tim Briner to the Citizen Budget Review Committee. And third was a discussion item regarding Planning Commission members' salaries and possible adjustment of their salaries in the budget. I should note Mr. Skinner, who had indicated that he might call in at your last meeting, is out of town. Advised me earlier this week he is unable to call in today, and I would respectfully suggest that the budget item discussion regarding the Planning Commission members' salaries might be deferred to a later agenda, or certainly 6 of 7 are here. The board can add that to the agenda for discussion as you see fit, but that was just a suggestion.
Any discussion on that item? I'd like to see it moved to the next meeting if we don't mind. I think we have nods of agreement that we'll move it to the next meeting.
I'll make a motion that we move item 1 and 2 in the bullpen into the consent agenda.
And approve the agenda otherwise?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Motion by Mr. Ross to move the 2 bullpen 1 and 2 to the agenda and to approve the agenda. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
And Chair's aye.
Thank you. That brings us to public presentation time. Amy, has anyone signed up?
Yes, sir.
We run through the guidelines for public presentations, which are as follows. Public presentations are an opportunity for citizens to present matters they believe deserve the board's attention. These presentations are not part of public hearing. Sign up to speak at each public hearing is separate. Public presentations are one-way communications from citizens to the Board of Supervisors. This is not a forum for dialogue or debate. For public presentations, please sign up on the provided sign-up sheet and please print clearly. Come to the lectern when your name is called. Clearly state your name and your voting district for our record. State whether you're speaking on your own behalf, in which case you'll have 3 minutes to speak, or on behalf of a group, in which case you'll have 5 minutes to speak. When the yellow light on the top of the podium comes on, you will have 30 seconds to sum up. When the red light comes on, the microphone will be turned off. Public presentations shall not be used to address matters subject to public hearings or to make political campaign speeches, private advertisements, or personal attacks. The citizens' written comments are always welcomed by the Board of Supervisors. Amy, who is first up?
There are 2 citizens signed up to speak, Vivica Berry, followed by Pamela Pell.
Hopefully I follow all the rules. My name is Vivica Berry. I'm Lee Hill District. I want to first of all encourage everyone here to watch last night's school board meeting, in particular the public comments section. You'll hear from 4 parents I don't know, Megan, Michelle, Jennifer. You'll hear from a couple of parents I do know. And the topic is bullying that's going on in our schools. Bullying is a lack of discipline that permits cruel and violent behavior and it's out of control in our schools. Most of us in this room know this. We need to enforce the student code of conduct, period. We don't need to have a committee or a commission to figure this one out. I spoke to 3 other friends of mine who in the past 2 months have pulled their kids out of public schools. That's incredible. I don't know that many people. What does it do to a child who cries out, who reports and sees that nothing is done except they end up punished? It breaks their spirits. And if you listen to last night's meeting, you'll hear that. What does it do to the spirit of our teachers who are powerless to stop it? Everyone has jobs, families to support. From what I understand, they can't even tell the parents it's going on. The parents hear about it when they walk out of the school with their child for the last time. That's heartbreaking. It must break their spirits too. Adults are supposed to protect the defenseless. The bullies and the bullied are the victims. Because in this scenario, you've got broken spirits on both sides. You've got the kids who can't hold their head up, the kids who never learn self-control, discipline, how to treat other people. They're on their own pipeline, and it's probably going to be death or imprisonment. Because that's what happens to people who tear people down eventually. We fund the school board. That's why I wanted to speak tonight. We have the right to demand better, and we should demand better. To do nothing is an act of cowardice.
Pamela Pell.
My name is Pamela Pell, and I live in Berkeley District. Good evening. My name is Pam Pell, and I am the chairwoman of the Department of Social Services Advisory Board. On behalf of the Advisory Board, I would like to acknowledge that this is National Social Workers Month, and I would like to first express my appreciation for all of the efforts performed by our Department of Social Services employees. I would also like to express my appreciation for the support that the Board of Supervisors has given to both the Department of Social Services and community-based partners who provide human services programs and supports in Spotsylvania. The needs in the community requiring a response from social services have grown significantly over the years, and you as a board have provided resources to assist in meeting those demands. There has been a partnership between the hard work of the agency and allocation of resources by the board. I do not believe many people would hesitate in acknowledging how important the basic assistance programs, SNAP, Medicaid, and others, are to citizens residing in each of your districts. There is no disagreement on the vital work the agency does in child and family services, stabilizing families and helping them achieve safe and nurturing homes, protecting our children and our elderly from abuse and neglect. This work is hard and almost always stressful. The agency faces ongoing challenges in carrying out its mission. Year after year, increases in workload in the core functions of the agency, rising levels of significant substance abuse in the community, changing policies and regulations. The agency has a legitimate need for more staff, but with the current office at capacity, there is little room for said needed staff. Limited or dysfunctional space is a work stressor completely within local control. The current space occupied in the Merchant Square building is overcrowded. What may have been sufficient for a staff of 77 in 2010 is completely inefficient and poorly laid out for a staff of 95 in 2018. Rooms for holding confidential meetings share walls and air vents, causing other confidential events, such as family visitations and mental health evaluations, to compromise privacy and confidentiality. Staff is trying to complete tasks requiring attention to detail or hold phone calls with clients while visitations are occurring in adjoining space. Children shouldn't be told to shush while visiting with family one time a week, and so they aren't. Staff just does their best to focus amid the distraction. Staff is bumped from restrooms to make room for drug screenings and crowded out of any available space where they might take their lunch break. Children brought to the agency to await pickup by their foster parents are sitting with workers in cubicles that are sized for a worker and not much else. I believe nothing I've described so far is acceptable to a governing body responsible for ensuring appropriate, safe, and adequate working conditions for county employees. As you consider the question of space, Remember that not only does the agency need sufficient square footage organized in an effective layout, it also needs to be located to promote successful working relationships with its partner agencies, the Office of the Sheriff, the Court Services Unit, the Commonwealth Attorney, and the Spotsylvania Community Services Board, and to easy access to what is almost a second office for foster care and CPS workers, the courts. There is a high level of face-to-face interaction with the courts and county offices in the courthouse area. Improved coordination between law enforcement and CPS APS has made significant impact on multiple CPS and APS cases. If DSS ends up located at some distance from the courthouse area, staff, already with caseloads higher than in any in the planning district, will have to spend more time in travel and less time in casework. Accordingly, DSS's space requirements are more than merely additional square footage. We want to make sure that the board is aware of the qualitative requirements, for example, such as the need for privacy for certain services and the need for close proximity to other county services. Close proximity for these working relationships supports the most vulnerable of our citizenry, the ones already facing a larger share of negative life experiences. That means these need to be the working relationships that are the most secure, the most supported, not overlooked as an unfortunate casualty of a lowest dollar cost solution. The DSS Advisory Board spends a significant amount of time reviewing partner agency applications for county resources. We look to see first if the applicants are serving core needs of basic food, basic shelter, and immediate safety and health concerns. Second, to see if the population is being served, if the population being served is the target population in Spotsy. We look for demonstrated success of the programs funded, as well as continued need, and making sure that there's a need for county funds. I encourage you tonight to examine the need for DSS space. Thank you for the time to speak, and thank you for the continued support of the work of social services.
There are no other citizens signed up to speak.
All right. Is there anybody that did not sign up for the public presentations that wishes to speak now? Go ahead.
Okay, I've never done this before, so if I faint, please catch me. I moved to the county 8 years ago from Hampton, Virginia.
Your name, please, ma'am?
Cynthia Passaretti, Chancellor.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
Sorry. I moved to the county 8 years ago from Hampton, Virginia, something I now regret. This, in my opinion, is a place that is rapidly becoming an area to drive through on the way to somewhere else. From the huge Cube Smart that was built outside my front window to the fact I can no longer get out of my neighborhood due to the traffic, it no longer will be my retirement home. I unfortunately cannot get the amount of money I paid for my house, or I would move tomorrow. On top of this, my home was assessed for $12,900 more for the next year. Mary of the Office of the Revenue did explain the reason for the assessment, but still, same house, same land. This amount is incredulous to me. I rapidly learned the vast difference in living in a city and living in a county. Everything from the lack of credit for recycling and having to pay for garbage removal to the difference in a police force and a sheriff. I thank County Representative Michelle for her assistance in trying to help me understand the chaos that is the county. Thanks to Kimberly of the Planning Department and a referral to Doug of the Transportation portion of the Planning Department. I did not know this department even existed. In previous traffic safety concerns, I called my HOA, who referred me to the sheriff, who said he was not comfortable in talking to a citizen, but not to confront this person. Not that I would, as his house has a sign that says guarded by Smith & Wesson. There's also a security camera preventing trespassing adjacent to my public street and my public sidewalk, down which I walk every morning. He did refer me to VDOT, who did help me. I also learned from VDOT that I have to schedule a street cleaner to come to clean the area around my sewers that the county is responsible for cleaning. Thank you to Supervisor Timothy for responding to my email in a positive manner. In the 8 years I have lived in the county, I've never received any communication from them, except the tax notices and the threatened letter I received that I had 3 days in which to register my canine or animal control would be notified. I called them. When I told them I did not receive a license form, she laughed at me, physically laughed at me, and told me to go to the site and print it out myself. I also received a tax bill for the vehicle I reported sold to DMV. According to the person I talked to about that office, does not communicate with DMV, and it was my responsibility. In my previous location, I received a welcome package telling me who to contact, and they also have 311, which is everything government. You want something, you call them, they refer you. Stafford, which is also a county, has 311. It also has a lifetime pet license, which I wish the county would also have.
I ask the county not to assume everyone is on social media and to better communicate with its citizens. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Is there anybody else that did not sign up that wishes to speak at this time? Seeing none, well, come on up.
Hi, Dawn Napper, Spotsylvania Education Association, Lee Hill District, if I still have to do that. The association is very concerned about the safety of our students, obviously. We had several parents come last night to school board meeting to bring this up, and it was explained to the parents that SRO officers were paid for by the county and that we had nothing to do with that ourselves. And as the lady pointed out previously, bullying is a big problem, and it is one of the problems that these shooters all seem to have been bullied. Everything I've read, the shooters were bullied. And I can tell you this week in my classroom alone, I am doing an entire week of a unit on bullying. Every day, yesterday it started with a little video, and we talked about it, and they had to write how it would feel to be bullied. Today, I read them 2 books, and they have to write about how it would feel if you were the person being bullied, how that person feels. So every day, I'm trying to get my kids to be empathetic, because I have several children in there, and they don't realize what they're doing is bullying. So it is a problem, and I'm not sure how to fix it. But I know I'm trying, and I know a lot of teachers who are trying, and I don't know about other teachers, but I have no problem telling parents that their children need to stop picking on other children. So that's definitely something that is, on every teacher's radar, and we try very hard to take care of it before it gets out of even elementary school. So, and that was all. Just, please consider putting an SRO officer in every school. I know mine's right next door, and I'm pretty sure the police would be there pretty quick, but not every school has that opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Martha Maston. I live in the Salem district on Harrison Road. Bullying is bad, no matter who does it. Some of the older people bully people that they work with so they can get their way. But these are just examples for younger people. Having taught for 28 years in Spotsylvania County schools, it can get rough, and we're not allowed to touch. I had the compliments of a cup of coffee been drizzled a little bit with acetone, the same thing that fingernail polish is removed from. That was taken care of a month later because nobody would say who did it because they were afraid of them. Finally, one girl talked to her mother, and they came to school the next day, and suddenly I had 2 less students in my class. They were not allowed to finish that year or any other year in Spotsylvania County. Right now I live on Harrison Road, and we have a very large bus stop at the entrance to housing, apartment housing. And for several days I was watching 4 large boys who would come and get behind the bushes, and one would take a book bag away from someone and do the twirling thing and throw it behind the bushes. That evening when I came to a meeting here, I got to talk to the sheriff about it. If you see something, say something. This morning, there was a group of young girls who came up to catch the bus. And all of a sudden, one of those girls didn't go to get on the bus. One of the little girls got off the bus. I didn't know they were allowed to do that. But she got off the bus, went and talked to the girl, and you could tell she was trying to get her back on the bus. But she wouldn't go. The little girl stayed with her, and they walked back down to the apartments. This is bullying. Think about that. We have to do something. We can't just let the students there to learn. What are we teaching?
Is there anybody else that did not sign up that wishes to speak at this time? Seeing no one, will close public presentations.
Mr. Chairman, that brings us to approval of your consent agenda. May I have the floor computer, please? May I have the floor, there we are. Today's consent agenda is as follows. First is approval of the February 13, 15, and 20th, 2018 board meeting minutes. Second is the appointment of Samuel Johnson to the Citizen Budget Review Committee for a term that expires December 31st of 2021. Third is the approval of a contract with PFM Financial Advisors, LLC, to provide financial advisor services to the county. It's a 3-year contract. $25,000 is the fee retainer in year 1, and that is adjustable annually. We expect it to go down. Item 4 is approval of a contract to Esitech Inc. to provide security system, components, installation, and maintenance, $682,522.15 to be funded with Judicial Center Security System project funds that are budgeted. Item 5 is approval of contract modification number 4 for the renewal of the Cherry Bakert LLP contract for auditing services. This is the 4th and final renewal of that engagement. It carries a lump sum fee of $130,966.20. Item 6 is the approval of a purchase order to National Auto Fleet Group. This is for a Kenworth dump truck with a lift axle. It is $108,104, and it's for the Utilities Department, paid for out of budgeted funds. Item 7 is authorization of a public hearing for comment on Rappahannock Electric Cooperative's request for an easement on county-owned property located on Old Robert E. Lee Drive. Public hearing to be held March 27, 2018, and this easement relates to the provision of electrical service to the Keswick development. Item 8 is authorization of a public hearing on the sale of properties, portions of tax map 4A51 and 10777 to adjacent landowners, owner for a total of $51,000 in appraised value. These are landlocked properties between the adjacent property and the reservoir. Item 9 is a budget adjustment and appropriation for the utilities fund balance for additional emergency repair work to the Route 3 sewer line. That scope of work needed to expand $145,000 from the utilities capital projects funds. Item 10 is a budget adjustment appropriation for emergency management funding, a $30,000 adjustment to account for funds coming from Dominion Energy. Item 11 is a budget adjustment and appropriation of insurance reimbursement, $5,241.51, concerning 2 accidents involving building department vehicles. Item 12 is a grant application request for the Virginia Dry Hydrant Grant Program. It's an application for 6548 Courthouse Road. Item 13 is a technical adjustment to the Capital Projects Fund revenue, corrects a prior adjustment to close out the VRE project. The net impact of the budget is 0. Item 14 is a use of budgeted contingency for cost related to an increase in the mailing radius for public zoning public hearings. It's a $6,300 adjustment to cover the additional cost. Item 15 is use of capital projects fund balance for the replacement of county administration vehicle. That's $28,500. The bullpen items added were the appointment of Gregory Bell to the Transportation Committee for a term that expires March 13 of 2019, and the appointment of Timothy Briner to the Citizen Budget Review Committee for a term that expires December 31st, 2019. And that is your...
Any board member wish to pull any of these items? All right, do you have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Motion approved by Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Dr. Trampy.
Aye.
Chair's aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That brings us to board reports.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Thank you. Just one item tonight is location for the May 12th board retreat and topics. If staff wouldn't mind sending around a group email to everybody just to start getting that moving, because I know one of the items that we definitely need to talk about is the courthouse area and the governmental master plan for our buildings. That's all. Thank you.
Only one thing, I do have a town hall scheduled for March 21st from 6 p.m. till 8:30 p.m. at the Chancellor Community Center. I think we'll have the fire chief and sheriff's representative there as well to answer any questions that may come up. Thanks.
Nothing to report.
Mr. Marshall.
Nothing to report.
Dr. Trampy.
Nothing at this time.
All right, and the chair has a couple items. First being, I'm a member of the Lake Anna Advisory Committee, and in our last meeting, we wanted to forward up a resolution to the board here. Also, the other jurisdictions are forwarding the same to their boards, particularly Louisa. And basically, it's Lake Anna Advisory Committee resolution, a resolution requesting additional law enforcement on Lake Anna from the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries in the counties of Louisa and Spotsylvania. Whereas Lake Anna is the third largest lake in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and the lake's usage has risen significantly in recent years, and whereas the increased popularity of personal watercraft, paddlecraft, and towed water sports such as wakeboarding and wake surfing creates dangerous situations where multiple users compete for limited space, and whereas a corresponding increase in the number of incidents, accidents, and near misses on the lake has occurred, and whereas although the lake is currently patrolled by emergency response and law enforcement staff from the counties of Louisa and Spotsylvania and the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, a more consistent and increased presence of law enforcement and emergency response capability is necessary to improve safety on Lake Anna. Therefore, be it resolved on the 29th day of November 2017 that the Lake Anna Advisory Committee hereby respectfully requests that the counties of Louisa and Spotsylvania and the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries commit to making safety on Lake Anna a higher priority in their budgets so that a consistent increased presence, and let me move this down, of law enforcement and emergency service will be provided by each county and DGIF in order to better prevent future dangerous and potentially fatal situations. And this was signed by the last year's chairperson, Ann Heidig. Another matter, I think all I really need is some head nods. The Lake Anna Advisory Committee wishes to add a representative from DGIF, Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, as a voting member to this board. And if there's no objection from this board, we can move forward with at least putting out the request from DGIF. Now, whether or not they'll do it, we don't know, but we just want basically each county to know what we were requesting and to be accepting of that request. Go ahead, Mr. Cole.
Would that take a change to the bylaws of the committee?
Yes, I forwarded those to you. There's bylaws and also a cooperation agreement. So I think this is just an initial feeling out of the localities to see if there's enough to move forward. Eventually, there will need to be changes to the bylaws, which the committee can make themselves. But there's a cooperation agreement that I think all the committee's governing bodies would have to amend. So there will be future additional actions. I think this is just more of a feeling out. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr.
It is. It's just the initial, make sure there's an agreement that, I guess a majority of the board that would be okay with that, especially since GGIF is a responsible party along with Dominion for the lake, and we're just an advisory portion, but we want to be able to have all parties at the table who have stake in this lake and the enforcement and protection of it. So, does anybody object to us moving forward as the Lake Anna Advisory Committee to see if we can get this done? Okay, seeing no objection, thank you. I guess the only last thing I have, I am also having I'm doing 2 town halls, basically because of the size of my district. The first one's going to be March 20th Livingston Elementary School. The second one's going to be March 28th at Brock Road Elementary School. Both meetings will start at 6:30, and I guess the major topics of discussion will be the budget and tax rate, the planned solar farm, and the Marshall building, along with other topics that may be brought up. And opinions and comments and questions are always welcomed. And I need the voices of my Livingston folks out there so I can have some guidance, and I greatly appreciate y'all showing up to one of those town halls. Thank you. That's all.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask a
Mr.
question.
Marshall, go ahead.
On the request to have more Marine patrol on Lake Anna, we're currently, we provide 30 days, 2 boats, 2 deputies is what we have now. We have a shortfall right now that to provide that overtime for that we need to address in our upcoming budget. What does Louisa provide? Do you know?
Off the top of my head, no, it's sporadic. I think they have 2 jet skis, basically. I don't know that they have a full-time boat that they've dedicated to it. They're having, I guess, I don't want to say personnel problems, but where they have the manpower to cover the lake as we do with our sheriff's office.
I agree. It's definitely a huge safety issue out there on Lake Anna. It's more and more people every day. We need to have some presence out there. It's just we need to have we have one side, they have the other. We need to have an equal share in patrolling the lake.
I agree.
So.
All right, Mr. Taylor.
So that brings us to presentations and reports by staff. We have a follow-up presentation on the capital improvement plan.
Good evening. We have 2 follow-up informational sessions on 2 projects that were under consideration. One is the Department of Social Services and the other is the Marshall Center. So we're going to actually start off with Department of Social Services first and then follow up with that with the second presentation. So we're looking at the Department of Social Services space needs options. And we have been asked to go back and take a look at the 2013 study that was done and then compare the validity of that study based on Gale's current staffing and caseloads. The immediate 5-year need based on review of her facilities and the personnel is about 25,000 square feet. That's what, to make it comfortable and actually be able to house the employees and the functions that she does now, we need about 25,000 square feet. The 10 to 15 year projected need is about 30,000 square feet. Once you get into the year 20 and out past that point, it's really hard to determine because not only is social services workload based on population, but also just the number of caseload and demographics that are associated with the county. So,
Mr. Loveday, one
yes.
second.
Really quick, is that 25,000 additional space or is
That's
it total?
That's total.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And how much do we have right now?
We have 18,000 square feet approximately in the second floor, and then social service has about 3,000 square feet on the first floor, but it's basically inefficiently laid out. It's mostly one large meeting space with some other small offices located on the first floor.
Mr. Chair, I may be jumping ahead, I don't mean to, but the space that's currently under renovation in the Merchant Square building on the first floor, how many square foot is that?
Approximately 7,000 square feet.
Okay, thank you.
So
Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. Yeah, basically we're looking at the 20-year projected. It's really hard to determine what you need at that point. So we're kind of looking at the immediate 5 to 15-year need, which is the 25,000 to 30,000 square feet. Other concerns after meeting with Gail and her staff that she's discussed previously is the confidentiality of the type of work that they do really requires some private office spaces and interview spaces. There are special uses such as the interview spaces for clients when they come in. Gail can speak more to the specifics of those cases. Visitation observation, when they're having to have specialized rooms for supervising visits of children, and then drug screening is another important function they really don't have a specialized space for. So we really need to kind of look at, in terms of space needs, there are very specialized functions that need to be built into a space in order to meet what social services requires. And something else to remember is if it's an inefficient layout, you're always going to increase the square footage. So if you have something that is, miles of corridors and, load-bearing walls here and there that are really taking up space, it greatly increases what the overall building footprint would need to be versus something that's open and can be flexed into the needs of social services. I'll let Gail talk about some of the space location factors associated with the department.
So in our presentation on the 15th, we did talk about some of the proximity concerns if we're looking to site a new location for the Department of Social Services. And I just want to again speak to the fact, yes, there is a safety concern that has been put forth, and it is something that our workers do deal with all the time on a regular basis. We deal with people who are in crisis situations, who may have been under an extended period of stress, and who may not be making the best decisions on what they say and sometimes what they do. And yes, we do believe that proximity to the public safety building would provide some measure of deterrent to people who may be considering adverse actions or when an adverse action is taking place in the agency. However, our proximity questions, when we look at it, has really more to do with the efficient operations of the agency and where are our working relationships located at, and what does it take to make those working relationships effective and efficient and be good use of resources. So the co-location of the health department, that's a benefit primarily to our citizens. That is something that is consistent through the state and certainly through the planning district 16, where almost all the agencies are either located near or with at least the clinic portion of the health department. The higher utilization between operations is actually with our courts. You heard one of the speakers, because that's been a conversation we've had at our advisory board meeting, that the courts are almost like a second office for foster care and for CPS. We went back and did an actual count of February and just looked at the actual number of days, either a full or partial day, that involved being a presence in the court. And for foster care, that's about 40% of the time, 40% of the days. And for CPS, for that 1 month snapshot, it's ranging between 30 and 35% of the days. Some of that's scheduled, some of it unscheduled. And so being in close proximity to the courts is very important to our efficient operations. We did a short look, and every time you add 5 minutes travel time based on the activity in February, you're adding about 3.1 worker days that would be lost just to travel. So that's why the courts are very important. The Sheriff's Office is one of our partners whenever we're doing our CPS investigations, our APS investigations. We have a high instance of time. And then the Court Services Unit is also somewhere where we have a large number of visits where it's face-to-face filings. It's nothing that can be done via email. So being in proximity to these offices is very important to the efficient and effective operations to social services. Not being co-located with them, which is not the norm. Within the PD-16, every single social services agency is either located near or within a mile of their courts, would present a hardship to operations and would likely see a detriment in service to our client base.
And one of the other factors we need to consider is just looking at the parking required for the facility. Gale is currently around 95 employees, so approximately 100 employees, plus the state vehicles assigned to the social services operation, and then, of course, customer spaces that have to be available. Gale is actually taking a harder look at the travel time loss and has prepared a couple of statistics that can give you a better idea of if social services was located, let's say, 20 minutes outside of the courthouse area, what the impact of her overall operations would be.
And this is a net increase of about 25 of 20 minutes, and we used the 20 minutes because that it was one of the sites that's sort of on the list of things. Hey, impossibility, where might DSS be located? So again, this is just based on the actual interaction that we've had with the court area in the month of February. So that's that 44.7% of available work days, that which either full or partial day. So based on the number of staff that were involved, the potential time lost to additional 20 minutes in travel would be 5.7 days. The CPS, again, that spent 15.2% of their available work days in court, so the potential time lost was 2.2 days. And the CPS also had an additional 41 worker days involved with those necessary visits to the Sheriff's Office, Court Services Unit, Commonwealth Attorney, which again, potential time lost to travel would be about 3.5 days. And looking at it, every 5 minutes in additional travel equated to about 3.1 days lost in work time. And quite frankly, drive time is dead time. There's really no productive use of time that they can be doing. They can't be transcribing. They can't be on their phones. Their attention should be on the road, of course. So it truly is lost time. Not on the screen this is the actual drive time. Not on the screen is also the impact. Frequently, the dockets on the court run till 5 o'clock or so. And so when workers have then got to return to the office to finish up time after that, you're actually then extending the workday outside their control, sometimes unplanned, which is, again, creating additional hardship and stress on your workforce, which is so something to be considered when we're talking about where do we site, what's an appropriate site and location for a DSS facility.
As Gail mentioned, there's also been discussions of the need to have the health department co-located with social services operations. We took a look at the 2013 space needs and kind of basically took a back-of-the-envelope assessment of what their current need is and what the projected is. Currently, they're located in the Holbrook building. That's about 8,000 square feet or so. So you could say their immediate need is in the 8,000 to 10,000 square foot range. With the 10-year projected, potentially 15,000 square feet. Once again, that just depends on state funding and how their operation grows. The services that we're aware of out of the Holbrook building operation here, they do have the clinic services, which are the immunizations, family services, and the Women and Infants and Children's program is coordinated out of the operations here in Spotsylvania. And they also have the co-location of the environmental services, which is your drain fills and wells that a lot of folks think about the health department as doing. So the board asked us to go out and look at some potential lease spaces, and we have a couple for your review. Basically, we took the 30,000 square foot assessment to kind of say what in Spotsylvania can meet that need. One of the prime candidates that came up that Tom or Moore helped coordinate a tour of actually is the former Capital One building down toward exit 126. It's up to about 40,000 square feet, and the current advertised leased rate is $17 per square foot per year. I believe that's a 7 or 8 year sublease of another entity that's actually renting the space. So we'd have to figure out what happens, of course, at the end of that sublease period. In terms of using it for social services or any office space, it really requires pretty minor modifications. It's a lot of office space in there and private rooms. There would be some work to accommodate potential drug screening applications, the interview rooms where you have to have two-way mirrors in, two-way windows in. You know, some of those things that could be built into the space, and we've already talked to the real estate broker, and they basically said, you know, we can accommodate those needs. We just need to work out the cost and how it impacts the lease rate and how the county wants to pursue that. Another option that has come up is the former U-Crops building. That is 63,000 square feet, but it is an old grocery store, so it is going to require heavy modification to meet an office flex space, and especially have the need for private and confidential locations for social services operations. They did not have an advertised rate. It's based on one of those deals, as you call them, and they say it's negotiable. But it did sell in January of this year for $2.2 million. And the broker did inform us that they're not interested in selling the building. They'd only be interested in doing a lease on the building. The other two locations that we've been able to find are both in South Point. One is the former Dick's Sporting Goods, and one is the former Best Buy. Dick's Sporting Goods location had about 50,000 square feet. Once again, the lease rate was not available. It's only open for negotiation. And then the same thing, Best Buy was about 30,000 square feet, lease rate not available. Once again, these were retail stores, so when you go in, a pretty, basically open boxes, so it would require a lot of heavy modification to meet the need and to figure out how to control that confidentiality requirement that social service carries. Now, when we look at any questions on the lease spaces we looked at before we move on to building options? So we did take a look at some of the building options in the courthouse area that are owned by the county. These are properties that the county currently owns, so we're not looking at land acquisition. You have two locations adjacent to the Holbert building, which we'll show a map here shortly of, and the public safety lot near the public safety building, the circuit courts. The key here is to really pursue any of those options. We would want to look at doing a design development to really look at the impacts of parking, stormwater, parcel size, building size, whether or not we're co-locating with the health department or is it social services only. Once again, that kind of impacts how many stories or how big a footprint the building would be. This gives an idea of where the public safety building lot would be. The only location that currently we own that this could work would actually be located in the parking lot itself. Once again, we would need to do some design development to determine the impacts long range to that parking, especially considering there is a potential expansion of public safety at one point in the future, the expansion of the judicial center, and the needs of the circuit court and general district court. So we'd have to factor all that in to see if additional land acquisition was required or other parking mitigation things could be done to try to make this site work. The other location is adjacent to the Holbert building. The county owns actually 3 parcels, but it is separated by a privately owned parcel. I think that you most likely would end up needing to do land acquisition or some type of expansion of the parcels we have in order to make this work, especially considering a 30 to 40,000 square foot building plus parking and stormwater. It'd be really tight to try to fit that on anything that's existing there. So this option, while we do own the land, would require certainly some land acquisition or trying to work with the parcel lines that are there. And with that, we can open up for some generalized discussion about some of the social services and
So real quick, I mean, why can't we just expand into the Merchant Square building? It's already an office building that we own. And it sounds like it already, with the additional 7,000 square feet, more than exceeds the requirement. That would seem like the least expensive and least intrusive.
The only thing we would have to do in order to, if we were to take the space that's being finished in in Merchant Square now, we'd have to find a location for Terra Doherty's museum storage and
right.
his.
So and so I'm getting at, we're giving up prime office space for storage. It's a lot easier to find conditioned storage if we had to, and move the social service in the building that's already being renovated right now. It almost doesn't seem. Why are we even having a discussion? It seems like the logical move is to finish out the existing building that social services is already in.
We could easily, I think we could easily finish that space into a flex office space for $75,000 and then plus whatever systems furniture.
Right, that just seems better than the $9 million we have allocated for a new building. So what's the drawback?
I think the drawback that, Ed, can you pipe in here if you'd like, but I think one of the biggest drawbacks we see is really a parking restriction on the building didn't we buy it with parking?
The county owns 40 spaces there.
So let me add real quick, Ed, because I heard something about we may not own the appropriate number of spaces for the building we bought. How did that happen?
That I don't know.
So I mean, did we even break our own ordinances by buying a building that didn't have adequate parking, or was it not designed properly?
I don't have the answer to that.
So I guess the next question would be, why don't we just buy the spaces or build on the existing lot?
I mean, with the existing parking that we have, and the plans for future development there, the concern is that we're not going to have adequate parking, even when the new building that's under construction opens there now.
Yeah, but we can buy the parking today. There's existing space. We're parking there now. Just acquire that, whatever's remaining, and use that as our facility. It'd be the least expensive and most I mean, if it's okay for Health and Human Services today, it should be good tomorrow with the additional space.
Yeah,
I mean, that would be my recommendation.
We would have to obviously speak with the developer that owns the property, but that's a possibility.
I mean, I would think, he wants some things that would be good for him as well. Thanks.
Anybody else? Mr. Marshall?
The square footage need that we have, correct me if I'm wrong as I was following along, social services could potentially fit into the Merchant Square building, but we also need to expand the health department also. Is that correct? Is that what we're looking at?
We haven't got a final determination back from the state on that. We were basically going on what, take it for what it's worth, the 2013 space needs study was stating based on those interviews held with the health department at that time. So we have not re-engaged the state to really see whether or not they really need additional space right now.
Okay, so that can be, we don't know what the state's needs are. So basically we can take that out of the equation.
Yeah, we would need to, if we were looking at what the state's needs are, we'd have to go back and reassess with their Department of General Services and kind of get a feel for what they're thinking. Because some of those functions have moved into the city of Fredericksburg and the office in Central Park.
So to reiterate what Mr. McLaughlin said, the Merchant Square building would work square footage wise to make this happen?
Square footage wise, yes, it would.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mr. Ross?
How much space is in the museum that's in the Merchant Square building right now?
The space that the current museum occupies, it's, I would say it's probably about a third to a half of the first floor. So it's probably about 2,000 to 3,000 square feet, because the social services takes about 3,000 square feet of that side, and about double. The bays are about the same. So I would guess, 2,000 square foot range probably.
So, but it's 7,000 square foot on the other side that's being renovated,
Right. So you have two very similar bays. So it's about 7,000 square feet on each side with the main corridor that goes between them. So social services is around 3,500 square feet on one side, the museum, and there are some mechanical areas on that side of the building.
About
2,000. So I would guess 2,000 to 3,000
so
square feet.
I'm showing, so the social, right now we have 18,000 feet on both the second floor and then another 3,000 on the first. It takes us to 21. The renovated space that we currently are planning on using for storage for the Judicial Center renovation is 7,000. That brings us to 28,000. And if we needed to, we could get another 2,000 from the museum if we moved the museum to a different location.
Yes, that matters.
We got about 30,000 square foot of space there that's usable. It sounds like the other thing is, I guess I'm not fond of tearing up a parking lot for a new building. In other words, you've built a parking lot, you've paid money, the county's paid money on a parking lot at a different location, I guess right across the street here, and then we're going to tear that up to put a new building in. So it seems like a waste of money. So again, I kind of reiterating what Mr. McLaughlin said, I'd like to work through putting, the space that we have. The other question I have is, I've heard about the economy getting better, and it may or may not bring an increase or decrease to the services that are provided. I would think, Gail, you probably would say you don't know. It's kind of a big uncertainty. Or would you say it's still going to increase to those levels?
Well, what we've seen so far is that we've had an increase in caseload.
Gotcha.
While the unemployment rate has gone down, we have not had a corresponding decrease in all of our public assistance programs. In fact, Medicaid rolls have gone up. And in a meeting with the commissioner just this past week, they were talking about the Medicaid expansion, which is going to mean additional work, additional staff. He also talked about several other initiatives that were part of what he'll be working towards, and at least two of them would mean, he acknowledged, would mean additional work, which would mean additional staff.
Gotcha. Historically, have we seen that kind of trend happen? Or is it, I mean, we've seen the economy get great and get bad over time. Are there studies out that say what we should expect? I understand that to date, what we're seeing, but have we done any research in what happens and what's happened in the past? In other words, if we have a bad economy and it gets better in the past, have we seen a trend of reduced services or increased services like this time?
Well, that's very difficult because at the same time that there are things happening in the economy, there's changes that are happening in policies that go through, which a classic example is when the recession started, there is a criteria on food stamps on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program called ABOB. That's able-bodied adults without children, without dependents. And there was a work requirement for ABOD clients. In 2009, due to the high unemployment rate, one of the initiatives the federal government did was to relieve that requirement. They suspended that requirement, and it was not put back in place till 2019 or 2013. So that had the effect of greatly expanding the roles at the time when the need itself was increasing. And then as it came down, it went down. Medicaid expansion, we've been, the state has done some preliminary numbers of the number of enrollees that would we would see an increase of. Right now we have just over 14,000 active enrollees in Medicaid, and we should be looking, Spotsylvania is estimated to receive another 5,500 if Medicaid expansion goes through as it currently expand.
Thank you.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Thank you. A lot of numbers have been bandied about, and so I'm a little confused. How many square feet do you need in 10 years?
We're estimating that the 10 to 15-year projected is around 30,000 square feet.
Okay, and so how many would be in the building if we moved the museum and we moved everything and we made it the Social Security or Social Services building?
It would be in the range of 28 to 30,000 square feet.
So we would have enough for the next 10 years, roughly.
If case loading and populations continued along the current track, then I believe so, yes.
Okay, so in 10 years, which 10 years ago was 2008, we would be back here at the same point saying, now what do we do with this building? Because I'm not sure why we want to keep kicking the can down the road when we eventually will have to build a new social services building or remove every office out of that building that is currently there, planning and economic development off the top floor, and just turn it into the social services building. But then we need to put those folks somewhere else. And as those departments grow, I really don't want to see the museum regulated to a back room somewhere. I think having it front and center is something positive for the county. At some point, we will have to build a building. And so if we build it now with the potential to expand, we will then actually save money because building costs just continually go up. So I would like to see us continue on the track of looking at a new building. We see that renting a building, and for those of who were around at the time, we did move the planning department, the zoning department, and economic development, I do believe, over to the Capital One buildings multiple years ago, and that, and you see where they are now. They're back here. So I think that that's an option that should be, in my opinion, taken off the table because it's not a practical one. And I would really hope that at our May 12th meeting that we have as a board, we can look at the big picture and take into account everything that we're going to be doing, including, I know, your next slides with the Marshall Center and what those folks in there and those departments in their needs are and where they're going to go. So I think this is probably a discussion that's bigger than just a social services building and more of a master plan for this area and for the potential growth of our departments. Thank you.
Anybody else? I'll just take one real quick second. Where would we put the museum if we move it all the way out? Plus all that, I'm sure it has to be climate controlled stuff.
The museum itself that's currently in the Merchant Square building, that's something we'd have to work on a new space for that. If you're talking about Mr. Doherty's annex storage and his office spaces, I would have to get with him the exact requirements, but I think the biggest thing is it has to be climate controlled and conditioned so that the humidity is controlled and things like that. I think the biggest thing would be trying to find Mr. Doherty a location where he can do his workshop area with his graphics. I know he creates a lot of the boards you see around the county and things like that. So that'd probably be the most problematic part of that, is finding him a location to where he can still do those functions, even with off-site inventory storage.
Okay. And, okay, I'll leave it at that. I guess, well, I won't. One more question. How about the security and stuff like that of the needs of this? Are you, in your estimates for the renovation? Are you putting in some more bathrooms, a kitchen area, some secure rooms? I mean, is all that put in there, or is this?
We were assuming in that initial estimate for the first floor, the $75,000, that's pretty much just finished as open office flex space. Really wasn't factoring in, those functions that require a lot of privacy and/or security control moving down on the first floor. There is the concern that Gail has raised, and something we would have to look at mitigating, is on the first floor you are surrounded by nothing but glass. So there's a lot of view into the building, so we'd have to mitigate that through either films or lines or whatever else, and that's it's some of the security. I won't go specifically into a lot of security concerns just because the nature of that, but there are some things we have to talk about to mitigate security of the staff, but it's not insurmountable.
Okay. All right. Thank you all very much.
All right, so we'll proceed to the Marshall Center. Floor computer, please. So I want to give you some options in the Marshall Center, and this presentation is not aimed at specifically talking about the space needs of the departments of the building. It's really kind of taking a step back and talking about the building itself, and what we see from a facilities manager's point of view when dealing with the Marshall Center. Give you a little quick background. You've probably seen it a million times. The Marshall Center was built in 1938 at the cost of $138,000. Today's dollars, it's about $2.5 million, so it's a pretty good deal. It was expanded in 1952 and 53. The right side, the black and white photo, is the original building, and then the wings were added in the 50s. You can see that like the bathroom upstairs is very 50s style. That's kind of roughly when a lot of that stuff was done. We have made some recent investment, and if you look at the overall 10-year investment, basically, within the last 5 to 10 years, the county has invested over $1 million in the facility. We did a roof in 2014. It's about $500,000. Exterior windows in 2015, $200,000. The air-cooled chillers, those were replaced about 5 years ago. First floor bathrooms were reworked. There is various paving and hardscape that was done. Senior center renovation, gymnasium repairs, and various lighting, and then exterior doors were upgraded. It cost about $35,000. But that still leaves some of the building guts in various states and conditions. I want to give you a brief view of the HVAC system of the building, and this kind of gives you more than just the brick and mortar on the outside. This is kind of the bowels of the building. The boiler and chiller system is about 10 to 15 years old. That top photo you see is the actual boiler itself. There's 2 in the building. It is on heating oil base. It's not propane based. We've looked at actually the next go-around iteration if we replace it as is, going to a propane, which is more energy efficient. The problem with that system is you have an independent boiler and independent chillers. So in your shoulder seasons, which we would consider spring and fall, basically you either have heat or you have cool in the building. So there is some discomfort to the folks in the building during those transitions, whether or not it be in going into winter and it's being a little bit cold in the building, and then going into summer it's a little bit hot in the building. It takes some time to build up steam and build up thermal in the system itself in order to put in operation. The bottom right photo that you see there, it's air compressor. Well, it actually controls the thermostats and the radiators in the building. It's actually an old pneumatic system. They still have it. We can still get replacement thermostats, but that thermostat you see there is a pneumatic thermostat. And I believe it's a $240 to $280 part when we have to replace it. The problem we have with a pneumatic control system for the HVAC is that it's really hard to find people who know what they're doing to work on it. We've had cases where somebody's left the county or left the vendor, and basically we get somebody new in and they really have no idea what they're looking at, because it's something you just don't see that often anymore. Something else considered in the HVAC system is the original piping that goes to the actual individual radiators in the building itself is original, so you're going to have scaling and buildup within those pipes. So ultimately, eventually, those pipes clog or burst or need to be replaced. So that if something was ever done in terms of the HVAC system, you'd have to look at replacing all of that piping, even if it was an one-for-one replacement. And there are certain areas like the common spaces in the building that don't necessarily have both heat and cool options. They may only have heat options versus cool, like the stairwells, some of the corridors in the building. Once again, that's just how the buildings were designed back in the 1930s. The electrical, there's been various upgrades. An upgrade was done in the 2000s. That's the top photo you see. Those are new centers that were installed. And then actually when the building was still operated as a school, it was also upgraded in the 80s. That's the bottom photo you'll see. The right-hand picture kind of shows where we're at in terms of equipment protection. I would say that roofing failure right there is about 10 feet from those brand new or relatively new electrical control centers. So, while we are replacing some of the main features of the building, it still leaves something to be desired for the actual spaces in which they're installed to make sure that investment is protected. The bottom photo you see, once again, that was upgraded in the 80s. It is harder to get parts for those sub-panels and that main panel that comes into the building. So that entire network needs to be replaced at one point, either prior to failure or preferably in a scheduled maintenance as opposed to something that just happens randomly one day. The sub-panels in the building, some of them have been repaired, some of them haven't. It really just depends on which upgrade it was hit on, whether it was the 2000s or the 80s. The wiring, there is no, it appears to be that all the wiring in the building is three-wire system. It's not a two-wire system. Some people might think of that as, when you open up a piece of Romex or a piece of electrical line now, you see a bare copper and you have two conductors in there. I think that all the building has been put on good ground. But once again, we haven't crawled through every single chase in the building and every single location that's there just because there's not accessible without ripping in the walls. So the wiring, there are parts, if we ever did major investment into the building itself, most likely need to be replaced, especially probably stuff from the 80s, and we may find some still two-wire systems in there. It just depends on what you find when you start ripping open walls. So the plumbing. The plumbing has probably been the least touched, limited upgrades, and basically it works great when it works until you reach the end of a life and it fails. And what I'm talking about that is it's mostly the original piping in the building. So you have cast iron sewer lines, it's not PVC. You have copper water mains. Well, actually you don't even have copper. You have galvanized in the building, and some of the renovation did put some copper in there. But as the galvanized builds up over the years, it reduces supply to the fixtures, it causes discolorations, and it causes slow and clogging drains. And this picture that you guys have seen before is the picture of the second floor women's restroom. Kind of gives you an idea of the current state of those restrooms on that second floor. And then I want to direct you to the picture of the water fountain down here. This was part of a repair that was done by Capital Construction 10 plus years ago. But it kind of shows you the dangers of just fixing the exterior portion of a facility without actually dealing with what's behind the walls. Because basically that water fountain has remained out of service and unused ever since the day it was installed, because the fact is that the water itself feeding that water fountain has so many secondary aesthetic effects. Basically, if you open it up, no one's really going to want to drink orange water. I'm not saying it's not a health concern. It's not, there's nothing in the water that's a danger to anyone, but it's a secondary aesthetic effect. It's not desirable. So that particular unit has been out of service more or less since it was installed back, let's say, 10 plus years ago. And you can only really fix problems like that by actually getting into the walls and actually getting that stuff replaced back to the point to where you actually have new plumbing. Also looking at the overall condition, actually I took our recent Division Director of Public Works, new hire, and we crawled around basically every point of the building, including the crawl spaces and the roof and the attic spaces. The building appears to be structurally sound. There is a lot of inactive leak damage. You can see it's been leaking at one point and just has, for various reasons, has not been repaired. You have peeling paint where basically the exterior of the wall doesn't have a vapor barrier on it or between the plaster and the exterior of the wall, so you get moisture wicking through. And you have various locations of plaster repair. if anybody's gone in the auditorium, you can see the impacts of what a leak would have on the decorative plaster and then the plaster that was placed on the walls. So to give you an idea of building maintenance costs, and this is kind of a harder slide to really kind of describe, but Merchant Square, that's pretty much the newest office building we have in the county, at least for the county side. It's about 50,000 square feet. It's about 46,000 square feet of usable. It costs us about $56,000 a year to do custodial services on that building, and about $11,000 in maintenance and repair items, and it's about $75,000 in utilities. Meaning the operations and maintenance to maintain that building right now, which it's being maintained at appropriate level of service, is around $140,000, $150,000 a year. The Marshall Center, however, is a 64,000 square foot building with about 25,000 square feet of that usable. And you think about when you walk in the Marshall Center, the big open corridors and the gymnasium areas that are used, but they're not used for office spaces. So I think my understanding is the way the space needs study was done, it looked at usable office space, not the secondary functions of the facility. It was aimed at staff department locations and offices. So it costs us about $44,000 a year in custodial services. So it's kind of a one-to-one. The $36,000 maintenance and repair is something that's kind of, we really need to take a hard look at because we have two factors here. One is that does pay for the maintenance and repairs associated with the snow library that's located in the building. But also, it's not necessarily keeping up at the rate of, not going to say damage, but basically the maintenance of the building itself when you're dealing with something built in 1939. So I think it's a little bit of an underinvestment, as you saw by the picture, like the electrical room where you had some failing ceiling not too far away from, a new electrical control panel. So there's some things that need to be upped in terms of maintaining the building. And if we keep up with it with a new roof was installed, we shouldn't have leaks. So if we repair the leak damage, unless we have a major gutter fails or something like that, we should be able to take care of that. The other big ticket item with the Marshall Center is the utilities, which this includes the heating oil for the boilers. Once again, if we ever do a one-for-one replacement on those, we would look at corn propane, which is a little more efficient. It's about $100,000 a year. So in all, you're looking at Merchant Square runs us about, let's say, $150,000 a year for maintenance and O&M, and then Marshall Center is about $175,000 per year for maintenance and O&M. So we took a real quick back-of-the-envelope review of the renovation options. And once again, this is something that's not based on a formal engineering study. This is basically based on staff experience and knowing kind of what could be done and what needs to be done at the facility. So I divide those into two options. Option one, which is MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. We look at an MEP renovation. Once again, back of the envelope, $5 to $10 million. It seems like a wide range, but it's an old building. You don't know what you're going to get into until you really do a thorough assessment. We'd be looking at the HVAC, electrical, and plumbing. Potentially, we'd look at doing like a hybrid system, which would basically use mini splits or more residential units to help us add private office spaces into the building. But the big point of that is you're replacing what the building condition is now. You're not really creating any new space within the building itself. It's basically replacing what's there and bringing it up to current code and current standard. Option two would be a full renovation, and this would be potentially $15 to $20 million. We'd be looking at insulation of exterior walls. We'd look at moving some walls around. We'd look at everything that was in the MEP renovation, but what can we do to really improve the space? And we walked through the corridors of the building and kind of performed a review of the spaces that were available. And really, you could knock holes in the walls that run down the hall. They are load bearing, so you really can't you have to put headers in them and things like that. But really, unless you're willing to take up half that corridor space, which gives you a very long 5-foot corridor, which I'm not sure that meets code. You'd only really be able to create 25, 30 small offices along the corridors. Because that really drives costs, because once again, the corridors themselves are not actually heated and cooled spaces. So we would have to figure out how to get heat and cool HVAC services of those small offices located along the walls themselves. So it's really kind of limited in what space can be created within the building itself, just because of the way it's constructed and the way it was designed in the 1930s. So looking at next steps, we kind of took a step back in the department and said, where could we go if we needed to find out more about the building? Really, it kind of starts with the engineering assessment. We've had a close look at it with in-house staff, but really having somebody come in and look at the building, evaluate the electrical, evaluate the mechanical, evaluate the conditions of the roof and structures. That's something that would be nice to have to really kind of verify or kind of create the budgets for renovation. We look at the structural aspects, we look at the roof, the HVAC, plumbing, electrical, and just various conditions of the building. And the estimated cost, I put $50,000 in there. We had an estimated cost from anywhere from 30 to 50. It's just back in the envelope cost from an architect that specializes in government buildings. And then based on the result of that engineering assessment, we could decide whether or not to move to a design development, which would give you a better idea of what renovation options or additions or anything else that could be done to the building to create whatever the desired use is. If that's office space, we look at that. If it's another function, we could look at that. But you really kind of need that engineering assessment first to figure out where you're at before you can really figure out where you're going. So that's kind of, in our estimated cost for that, once again, back in the envelope from our architectural companies, $30,000, $50,000, and that's just designed. That's not plans. That's just telling you what, some sketches and some ideas, and based on code, what they think could be done with the space in the building. So with that, that's a lot of information, but be open for any discussion or questions you guys have.
Well, since I'm not seeing anybody nod and stuff, this may be a question for Mr. Cole or Mr. Taylor. Would we be able to put a referendum on the ballots as far as what to do with this, to our citizens, as far as what to do with this building? Do we want to spend this kind of money on the building, or do we need to do something else? Is that possible to do? Anybody know at all?
Well, wasn't it on the...
Right, formed into a question to authorize the sale of bonds to engage debt to afford the renovations, if it's styled that way. If we work through the process, have estimates and a budget for what the investment would do, then it could be framed as a bond referendum question to authorize bond debt to fund the renovation.
It can't be phrased where we have this building, possible costs, and what do we want to do with it?
Well, it's not a multiple choice proposition. It would have to be on the ballot. It's a yes or no question. It would be something on the order of, and Carl and bond counsel would work out the exact wording, but we've seen the questions before. Shall the county have the authorization to issue X many dollars in bond debt for the purpose of renovating the Marshall Center?
Would add that it was part of the general government bond that was voted down. I mean, that it wasn't just the Marshall Center, but it was included in the general government bond referendum question that did not pass.
So we can't just ask
You could do a bond referendum just for the Marshall Center if you wanted to.
No, I'm talking about with a more specific. I'll get right down to it. Do we want to keep the Marshall Center, or do we want to tear it down, or do we want to invest this kind of money in this type of building? Question. Are you able to do anything like that, where we leave it up to the citizens to make the decision to either tear it down or spend $15 million on it?
I think you would probably have to, for a question like that, you would probably have to have General Assembly authorization for it.
Okay.
But just to be clear, Mr. Benton, if I may, the 2014 bond referendum didn't specifically have money in it for the Marshall Center. There was money in there for renovation to, I believe, the Holbert building and some other county buildings.
Okay.
And it did not pass.
Okay, thank you. Mr.
Mr.
McLaughlin.
Chair, one of the slides talked about usable space. What's not usable in the building?
Basically, the term usable space, from what the study was looking at, was aimed at the creation of office space. Let's see, we can go back to that slide for you. So, they aren't really counting necessarily the large corridors that are in there in the building. They aren't looking at necessarily some of the kitchen spaces. They're not looking at they don't necessarily looking at gymnasium space. It's kind of aimed at what would be conducive to retrofit into like an office space.
I guess that would be the question. If you're going to go forward and look at the total building as a renovation, I think you got to take a look at the kitchen, the auditorium, all the spaces in there, and what is the best and most, highest value of those spaces. Whether it means building another gymnasium somewhere else or something, if we need space like that. But if you're going to put that kind of money into a building, I think you'd want to get the most out of it. So that's my concern when, only a third of the building is actually usable.
I think that was part of the constraints placed in 2013 on that study. I think so that's something certainly if we make design development we want to look at.
Right. I guess if we're going to go forward and do an engineering assessment of the building, make sure it's even feasible, to move forward, that we do the design would look at options, whether it's how do you get the most space out of the 64,000 square foot building to make it worthwhile.
That would be the idea, Mr. McLaughlin, to do the engineering assessment, to look at the space, look at the gymnasium space, look at the multipurpose room space that's in there, and see whether or not we could actually use that for additional office space.
Good place for the museum, too, next to the library.
Mr. Marshall.
Mr. Chairman, also I'd like to comment on the unusable space. The gymnasium, that's being used by Parks and Rec. They got basketball games that go on there. Auditorium's being used by the community. They have several different events there. We have a senior center there that I'm assuming that's being used daily, plus the library. So the usable space is there. It's just not being used as an office space. So the presentation with the slide we're looking at here is a little deceiving. If you actually work through the numbers and you include that usable space, the Marshall Center is actually 12 cents cheaper per square foot to maintain than the Merchant Square building if you figure it that way. I would like to see we can renovate this building and fix problems. Looks like to me we need plumbing, electrical, heat and AC, and a little paint and drywall work. If we've got to reevaluate a roof that we put in 4 years ago, we don't need to use that roofing company ever again in Spotsylvania County. That roof's 4 years old. You've got 6-year-old windows. Those structural components should be good. If not, we have a problem.
No, there's no issue with those. I think it's mostly just basically crawling around the roof of the building and checking the timbers and those connections and stuff like that. That's what I'm looking at, that structural aspect of it. So.
All right. So when I see the $5 to $10 million renovation costs, I think we're high. I think we can get it done probably at a cheaper rate than that. And it's one thing where we don't have to do it all at one time. We can do it over. We can space it out if that's what's needed. I do know that building's being used by a lot of different entities in the county, and I'd like to keep it available to the public. Thank you.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Thank you. And I'd like to reiterate for our board retreat to actually figure out what we want to use the building for. Because, Mr. Marshall, you're right, there's a lot of space in there that's being used for other things. So is it the best use to have office space in there for the finance department, let's say? Should we move them somewhere else? And if so, what does that turn into? So I think we need to have a bigger discussion and not look at these piece by piece, but look at it in a whole, and how does it all work together? Because $5 million by itself might seem, or $10 million might seem unreasonable, but in the bigger scheme, it fits into a piece of a puzzle that makes sense because it is this component of the larger picture. So I think that that's how we need to take a look at all of this. Thank you.
Mr. Taylor, can you make sure we get that on our retreat discussion?
Yes, sir. And I will also, going back to Mr. McLaughlin's comment in the prior discussion, we'll pull forward information on the parking agreement involved with the Merchant Square building and the parking complement there and bring back detail.
Please. And do we need any discussion on spending any money for any studies at this time? Or do we want to wait until after the retreat? I'm kind of wait till after the retreat. All right. All righty.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Board members, that brings us to the joint work session with the school board. And we'd invite you to relocate and have suggested with place cards co-seating by district of the two boards.
Want to do it down there?
You want to do it before we got down there? Either or, whatever you want to do it.
We'll just do it down there.
Take it with us.
Justin, how you doing?
How you doing, sir?
Hey, how are you? I was just confirming.
You picking on you over there? Yeah. We got his friend the other day. You've seen the place, right?
There we go.
I don't know how somebody can get more seriously. I don't know how somebody can get more seriously. We were over there before they finished this catching because it's so close. We picked up, we got little printouts. We picked the printout on the way out. It was very short. So car and building people. It's just very. Hey, how you doing, Mr. Ross? Yep.
Okay, school board members, we have a quorum. All are in attendance this evening, and so I'm going to call the school board meeting to order.
I make a motion. You move? We don't need a motion.
All right. Any board members have some questions they want to move forward with the schools? Dr. Trammey.
Not sure who it was who said that predictions are always difficult, especially when they're about the future. I was wondering, assuming that there are no new state mandates, which is never a good assumption, but let's assume that. And as best as we can tell, among the 120 new hires, 60 of which are this year, as best we can estimate, will that take care of the needs of special needs students for the foreseeable future?
I'm just going to give a general response to that, and if you want specifics about any of our various special needs populations, we can go into a little bit more depth, but it's a projection, just like anything that we do, and the 120 positions that include many for special education were compiled really for this budget year, and just like the salary proposal, we look to try to phase it in over 3 years. So as it would stand today, Dr. Trampy, we do believe that that would accommodate the current needs that we have reasonably. I think, you know, and I'm sure in frustration you hear all the time more. And so we're never going to say that we wouldn't want more resources, especially in an area like that, in special needs. But I think as best we're able to project it, and hopefully the one wild card in that is that of our populations, the one that has grown most dramatically over the last 5 years has been our students with special needs. But we do believe if we're able to get that much in the 1 year, the 60 positions, that it's certainly going to go a long way towards that. You mentioned the mandates. I don't know if there'll be any additional state mandates related to special education, but there's been a long-standing mandate, IDEA, that has been, you know, historically and drastically underfunded. So it does put a substantial burden not only at the state level but here at the local level. So we are most appreciative of being able to move forward, if possible, with the positions that we have. And we'll do all we can to try to maximize those resources because we don't also know that just throwing additional people at the challenge is not going to solve it. But there are some parts of that, this is the last thing I'll share, that are a bit out of the hands from an administrative level, and that is when an IEP team convenes and determines the needs of an individual child per their individualized education plan, that does dictate in some cases additional resources that we cannot right now project for.
And I'll interrupt real quick in our questions. Myself and Mr. Marshall have to read a disclosure statement since we're talking about budget items. I'll go ahead and with mine. I hereby disclose I have an interest in the budget transaction as a retired employee of the county. My disclosure is on file with the clerk and is available to the public for review. Mark and Amy, please record this disclosure in the minutes of this meeting as required by law. Mr. Marshall.
I also have to read mine. I hereby disclose I have an interest in the budget transaction as an employee of the county. My disclosure is on file with the clerk and available to the public for review. Mark and Amy, please record this disclosure in the minutes of this meeting as required by law.
And I think we got it in just in time. Thank goodness. Any other board members have some questions? I'll ask what, Dr. Baker, and I appreciate you taking the time with me to meet and discuss some of the budget items. I guess one question I did not ask, I'm absolutely for all the special needs teachers and everything. I just wanted to clarify, where are these the teacher positions? What has brought about the need for those positions? Are they helping classrooms, or just what's going on with that?
I just want to make sure I'm clear. When you're saying teachers, you mean all of the teacher positions or the ones that are specifically in special education or the ones that are specifically general education?
General.
General education. And those right now are projected really twofold. One, based on overall enrollment increases, especially the ones that we had this year, is to try to maintain, and that was part of the initial budget presentation, just try to maintain where we are generally with class sizes. And so as we move forward, we'll have to continue to look at that each year based on total enrollment. So those could go across the levels. We also, I think, pointed out in the presentation, there's a K-3 class size requirement that comes from the state. So we have to watch closely at certain schools with certain class sizes that have to be at a certain limit. And so we'll continue to address that. And so these positions give us some flexibility to target those areas. So to say specifically right at this moment that one teacher goes to a particular elementary and a particular grade level, we can't do at the moment, but we can project it out, and then when we have our enrollment going into the summer, we'll be able to target those where they're needed.
Okay, thank you. And of course, it's always when I leave the meeting and start driving down the road, I'm like, dang on it.
Understood.
But I appreciate it again, your meeting with me.
Thank you.
Any others? Mr. Yakubowski.
Thank you. I think it's very unfair for some when they say you're only having an increase of 87 or 100 students, so why do you need 60 positions? Because if you put 60 in 30 schools, it borderlines absurdity, in my opinion, of an argument. The breakdown that I received in the email to the answers of the questions from the CBRC, 28 instruction contracted positions, 24 special ed contracted positions, then 8 instructional technology assistants, and then there's a further breakdown of that. So my question would be, because every year you come in and you ask, and we hear, and then we do what we do, and that varies from year to year. Are we playing catch up? Is that what a lot of this is? Or is this new growth that we're anticipating so that we can offset it and get ahead? Because I know that the teacher ranks have been reduced over the years. And so, is this backfill of a lot of these positions?
I want to thank the board for these very easy questions.
That's just the first one.
Oh, okay. Much to look forward to. Thank you. I just wanted, I want to, again, give a broader context because I don't want to mislead because I'm not looking at numbers. But I know that even last year when we were developing the budget and we wanted to illustrate that as we continue to look to add teachers, that we're really trying to get back to the ratios that we had pre-recession. So from that perspective, especially as we're starting to see growth, it's really a combination of both. Is we're trying to not lose ground that we've been able to gain, and I thank this board for any additional funding they've provided to help us to, as you're calling it, backfill, but try to get back to closer to where we were previously in terms of teacher numbers and really staffing numbers across the board. I think if you were to look at any particular area of staffing, and that includes instructional as well as non-instructional staff, we are not at the same levels that we were in many cases a decade ago. However, from a size perspective, we're getting right back to where we were a decade ago. So we also now, as we are closer but still not there, we're trying to again, a combination of addressing the growth as it comes, but we also are trying to balance that with the need to compensate the people that we have who have remained dedicated and loyal and done an outstanding job. So we're really trying to balance that. If we built the budget to sell out to one of those concepts, then the other would, there'd be a detriment. So in closing, what we would like to do is certainly add even more resources to get back to where we were and address current and future growth projections. But we think right now, and this budget reflects it, and I think I shared it last time we had a work session, or when the board presented, that we also have to look at staffing our classrooms and our schools, not just based on a teacher-student ratio, but based on a human resource to student need ratio. And so that's why, in addition to the regular education teachers, there are also many other positions that we believe are going to help support schools and classrooms moving forward. So it's not, and I know it's a complex response, but it is all of those things that we're trying to do.
Well, no, I appreciate the response and the amount of detail that you give, because, and I didn't mean backfill in a bad way. We were just talking construction, and so it's on my mind. But the idea that during the recession and sort of the lean times, you know, everybody cut back and things were reduced. But as we're coming out of that and we have needs, and I did listen to your board meeting last night, and you had a lot of folks that stood up, and you have a lot of needs. And I think people are starting to realize that there are needs that, now that we have more funding or potential more funding with new growth coming in, that's a combination that, if left too long without being addressed, can really get into a position of being a big hole we have to dig out of. And so I'm wondering, because I've heard other board members say that perhaps, you know, you don't need 60 new positions this year. Can you do with 20? And so, you know, I'm not of that opinion, but I would just like it sort of addressed that how next year you're going to come back and ask for what you didn't get plus. And so if we continue to do this, at some point you're going to find yourself with an ask of what we used to have of $10, $12, $15 million gap, which I don't think anybody wants to be at that point. So how can we avoid that? And so these 60 positions, you're basically saying that they are, whatever the word you use for backfill, to make up, and also looking at the growth that we have seen coming, because you actually have had more students that have come in, and if that trend goes as it has, of about 100 a year, you still need to accommodate those new students that come in.
And just to the last point that you mentioned, and we are hoping that it's only 100 per year. And I think that I appreciate the staff that helped me to provide to you all a response on a more detailed question about projecting the enrollment. And with some of the subdivisions, some of the larger ones that are currently awaiting to start build out, we are hoping that we have that kind of time. But there is that wild card part of that. There's a lot of students potentially coming, and so we have to, part of this is to try to make sure that we don't get behind. You also mentioned that there are a lot of needs, and I don't think there's ever been a time that I've been in public education where there's not been a lot of needs. But I will say that there's also never been a time in my leading in public education where the level of accountability has been any greater. And so that's never going to go away, the level of expectations and the level of accountability, and really making sure that we not only do it all, but that we do it all well. And I know we want to be able to deliver that, but in our business, it requires people to do that.
Well, and one of the other things, and as we have our conversation, and thanks for listening in, I don't mean to monopolize the time, but if anybody has anything, you can shut me up, and that's quite all right. But there's one other thing that we do need to keep in mind, too, with growth and affordability of housing and meeting with developers and different projects that are coming in. Our locality is an affordable area when compared to Northern Virginia, especially. So you will see a lot of that trend coming back down south, simply because the housing prices up north just get out of control. And so you will see new, especially younger families that move down here to, be able to afford something. So it might not just be new growth, but it will also be folks that are moving in while older folks are moving out. And so there's that is basically it's very hard to predict what exactly is going to be coming. So we just need to not put ourselves in a position that if we have one of those years where we have 200 or 300 new kids that show up, that the gap is so huge because we didn't fill it in previous years. And so that's what I want to try to avoid. The other thing too is, and I appreciate the email that was forwarded with the questions that the CBRC had for you all, and I noticed that you did a turnaround time of basically 4 days, and I think there was a weekend in there too. So whoever put in that time, thank you. But one of the things that I think the public needs to understand some of these is that this is attachment C on the email, and it's the total instructional positions and instructional positions per 1,000 students. And it goes through all the cities and counties in Virginia, and it ranks them according to, per 1,000 students and how many principals and assistant principals we have. And Spotsylvania ranks, we're actually fourth from the bottom, and that's a good thing in this case. That our budget on the school side is heavy on the instruction side and not heavy on the administration side, which I hear an awful lot of, which I think really needs to be debunked, because the money from the going to the classroom is getting to the classroom. It's not going to build up the administration side of what you all doing. And just to state, the person coming in, or the locality at the last, is Martinsville, Manassas Park, Prince William, Colonial Heights, and then Spotsylvania County. So I think that we're doing a very good job. We even beat out Stafford in this one too, which is always a point of pride for me. But I think some of those things really need to get across, because this budget is, I think, very doable. You're also putting in your evergreen study, which the county asked you to do, and you did do it, and it took more time to get the numbers back. But basically, you're doing the mid-grade upgrade just as the county has done over 3 years, just as the county has done. So I had said from the beginning, and I'll say again, that I will fully support that, and I think that your initiatives need to be supported so that we don't find ourselves in a bigger hole in the near future. So thank you very much.
Anybody else? Mr. Marshall, go ahead.
Mr. Baker, just to make sure I'm right on these numbers. 12 resource officers, is that what we're short as far as having every school covered?
I just had this conversation with the sheriff the other day, so is he here? He's not, okay. I thought maybe he was going to be here tonight. I think it's 15. I think it's a little bit more than that. We have full-time resource officers at our 12 secondary schools, traditional secondary schools, middle and high. We have 3 currently at the 3 elementary school. And we do not have, I think it's at least 15. We have one that's split between John J. Wright and, yes. So we need at least 15.
And we toured John J. Wright. That resource officer needs to be there full time. And it's society's gotten into a bad point where it's sad to say, but we need these resource officers at every one of these schools now. Even on the elementary school level. I hate to say we've gotten to that point, but we're there. We're past it. We're kind of behind the 8 ball on that, so it's something we need to look at it and consider, because the safety of the kids means a lot to me. So I appreciate that.
I want to say something too about school resource officers, not just, for the safety's sake, but also for the students. There are many students who don't always see police officers in a positive light. So this is a good way for the students to see police officers in a positive light. Somebody's working with them, they see they're friendly, they're helpful, and then they can be there. They can talk about citizenship. They can be part of the school as well as there for safety. So there's multiple reasons to have our school resource officers as well.
Yes, sir.
It's interesting, as we had our meeting last night, and we had parents speak to us about the importance of addressing mental health and the issues that, that our counselors and our folks are facing. In the budget request, we have 5 social workers and 3 guidance counselors. We're seeing the need, as our student population is ever changing, their needs are changing, and we have to address those needs. Public safety, we had a long session last night on a presentation dealing with enhancements over time as we're trying to improve the safety from multiple aspects. Whether it's bus transportation, whether it's from the instructional side, whether it's from the maintenance side, the facility side, multiple facets, including, cooperation agreements with the sheriff's office. The social workers and guidance counselors are just 2 of the pieces that fit into this puzzle. It's not a silver bullet that's going to address any of this. It's a combination of all the factors. When I was reading a report earlier today, because I'm part of a teacher licensure committee at the state level, and we have a meeting Monday morning. In preparation for that was a packet that came in the FedEx of 5 different reports. It was interesting as was speaking to the teacher shortage that's across the Commonwealth, and what is one of the needs that they talk about is compensation. We have to recognize the need that we have to compensate our teachers if we want to have them, come to us, be with us, stay with us. But that's not the only facet of it. Naturally, it's how they work with the principals, what's the environment, how do we retain them, how do we mentor them. There's a host of activities that go with it, but number 1 on the top of the list was funding for teacher salaries. With number 1. It's kind of interesting because when you think of it, at the state level, while that is a number 1, it didn't make it to be a number 1 coming from the General Assembly perspective, so it's being thrown back on the locality to have to find it. And one of the ways that we've been looking at to do it is to look at health insurance, because it plays part of compensation, as to what can we do to give it ourselves some budget capacity. So we're trying to address it from multifaceted approach. And I think our request is that you do give due consideration to the request that the superintendent presented to the board and we're presenting to you, because we think it is trying to address the needs of the students and our staff, the faculty, in a very planned mode. That's why we went with a 3-year plan. Our health insurance is on a 5-year schedule. We're trying to put it in a structured way that we can address it programmatically. We're not trying to eat the whole apple in one bite. We're trying to take a piece at a time, but make sure it's systematic and that we're addressing it. So the positions that we presented, that 60 seems like a large number, and I agree. 120, now you're asking for 60. It seems large. But when you take a look at the pieces of it, break it down, you have 28 that are the general, 24 is special ed, 4 instructional technology assistants, you have the 16 regulars, you have a gifted teacher, 5 social workers, 3 counselors, 2 administrative interns, 8 instructional technology assistants. Then on the special ed side, besides the social worker and counselors, you have early childhood teachers, 4. With paras, they need to have the paras. There's 8 of those. Courthouse Academy a teacher, and Courthouse Academy para-ed. Speech language pathologist. We can't, speech is absolutely critical. Occupational therapist, 2. Gateway Academy teacher and para. Adaptive PE teacher and signing assistant. We have to work with those. Our students need these facilities, these resources. So it's the needs of the students that are driving the whole machine. Our whole complex is driven by the needs of the students. So that boils down to instruction, and then everything else is a support service. So I think we put together a very good budget request. I know the request is asking for more money, but I think it is definitely needed. It's not a want, it is definitely a need. And it got compounded by the situation about 3 weeks ago, with the focus being on physical plant safety, security, but it all is tied back to our mental health, which we have to address as well. And our social workers and our counselors are letting us know it is definitely needed. Definitely needed. Thank you.
Anybody else? I'll just make some quick comments. Number one, I kind of like the seating arrangement. I don't know what it is about it, but I truly do. It kind of gives us a mix. The school security, especially with the elementary schools, I think it would be worth looking at. I don't know. I definitely want some feedback from y'all as far as armed security. There's ways to do that. It wouldn't be as costly as SROs. There's still, I don't want to say a whole lot because we're in public. There'll still be gaps with the use of SROs. Sick, vacation, meetings, training, all that pulls resources. And when you only have a certain number of individuals that are assigned to schools, it's kind of hard to pull from detectives or general assignment patrol to fill those spots. It takes some specific training normally. So there's some issues just with the use of SROs, as I'm sure there would be with armed security. But I think particularly with the elementary schools, I think it would be wise for us to look at armed security since we have legislation that allows it. And I don't think we'll ever prevent. If somebody has that mentality to do the harm to our kids, you can just look at the simple design of the buildings we have. You would only have to go, well, I don't even want to say anymore, but it would not be hard. And that's with one classroom. If you want to know specifics, I can talk individually, but I'm not going to. But anyway, so there's a lot. We can spend millions and millions and millions on security of these buildings, and still there's going to be holes. I'm just making general statements. I do support that your position's needed. I do, I've been in your schools enough and with my own kids to understand those needs, and I applaud the schools at being able to, when there's an issue at one school, to be able to move resources and respond to stuff. That's pretty amazing. And with the classes that you have some kids with special needs into that are blended into the classroom that don't feel segregated. That's from their entire graduating class. You talk about bullying when you start moving kids out to and where they can actually be ridiculed for being separated and stuff like that. Because I was one of those kids at one point. I had a very low reading skills ability when I was much younger. Still have that, what takes you probably 2 minutes to read, and a paragraph would take me 10. So I still have some of that, but I was sent to different classes for reading when I was very young, and I was ridiculed. But back then it was, suck it up, Greg. This is what you got to do, and that's what I did. So, and having the kids that we do, that have, particularly one that has special needs, I understand the struggles that even teachers have. When you have 3 or 4 special needs kids in your class with IEPs, and each of those are different, I don't know how they individually keep track of everything. But it's impressive how you've been able to incorporate a lot of these kids into the normal classrooms with really no attention brought to them. That's incredible. And I can just say, I need to come to more of your meetings, as I would to ask you to come to more of our meetings where you see some of our issues. This budget, as you all know, everybody knows here, it's so fluid, this budget. And, each budget I consider to be a needs-based. We can either hire some firefighters or some sheriff's deputies or fix a building or buy a building or build a building. It's just, all these issues that we have compound with what your needs are. And I just hope the public and yourselves, maybe coming to some of our meetings can really get a grip of what we deal with every year, and just about every meeting, it seems like here lately. But I applaud everybody's cooperation here, and I applaud everybody really that I know take these decisions very seriously and spend the extra time that is demanded to make these decisions. So I won't babble anymore. Go ahead, sir. Yes, sir.
I want to take an opportunity to caveat something that I made mention of last night at our board meeting, especially as it pertains to school safety. We recognize that an issue of this magnitude cannot be solved or engaged in a vacuum. It requires integration from all the different agencies and organizations within the county. We have a wonderful relationship with the Sheriff's Department, and Sheriff Harris has done an exceptional job of coordinating with Dr. Baker, and we are continuously trying to do what's appropriate to make sure our students are safe. I had the opportunity to observe teachers under the observation of sheriff's deputies go through active shooter drills at Riverview Elementary. And the teachers were very engaged. They received some excellent feedback from subject matter experts and how to secure their unique and individual rooms so they can protect their students. And I have no doubt that that is going on throughout the entire division, and the Sheriff's Department is working enthusiastically and providing great subject matter expertise to our teachers, and they're absorbing that information for our students' best benefit. So I want to let the community know it's fear sometimes can overwhelm us, and we have a reason to be concerned, but we don't have a reason to be fearful. I'm of the belief that we were not given a spirit of fear, but of power and a sound mind and love, and that's what we do when we work together, so that we can give our students the best environment and to learn, and parents the ability to understand that we're going to do our level best to take care of their children and children that this community values. We also understand that it's a community effort, that organizations like Aspire, who are engaging in mentorship to assist in a variety of different of the maladies that we have in society, where young people need mentors. We're inviting them into the school, and of course we're vetting their purpose and intent. But our kids need more mentors, and our teachers are not capable of being stretched to do more than what's already on their plate. And so we need the community to come in and engage with us in that way. And I have spoken as a person that has experienced tragedy and how we put together a race that's held every year at Cortland High School to bring awareness to teen violence, and I'm always very appreciative of the support not only that we get from the school division but also from the county in order to put that race on and to bring awareness of a very important issue. So it takes all of us working in concert together, and not doing this in a vacuum, but we're doing this for the benefit of our children is not just the school's responsibility, and it's not just the sheriff's responsibility. It's all of our responsibilities, and we all have something to contribute, and we should have a spirit of or a willingness to do that. So I just thank you for giving me an opportunity to make that comment, and I just want our public to know that we are very vigilant and we take school safety very seriously.
I want to take just a couple of minutes and put the job of what we're trying to do in education in context compared to the kind of job the county has in their hands. And I think I can relate it maybe to building of the bridge across the Rappahannock. For a long time, there's been a need for another bridge, and eventually we're going to get it. And in the meantime, everybody has learned how to get to work, to recreation, or wherever they're heading. Our challenge is very different. Think a minute, about an hour ago, you were listening to your staff make presentations about construction and the needs for rebuilding buildings, and you got some real challenges and needs there. But if you don't get it done this year, a lot of it will be there next year, and it'll still be solved. And if it's not next year, it might even be the third year, and eventually it's going to happen. But when we have a five-year-old child come to us as a kindergartner, and the teacher says to the parent, "Does your child enjoy books?" And the parent says, "Oh, he's never had a book." Well, that child is a couple of years behind when he starts kindergarten. But that child goes into a kindergarten classroom, and the teacher is going to be dealing with that child, and also the child who is, right now, the American Library Association is stressing to parents that you should try to expose your children to 1,000 books by the time they start kindergarten. Now, you compare the child I just talked about with the child with that background, now who's going to do better in school? It's very clear. And the challenge that we have then is that when the need exists, that's when we got to solve the problem. We talk about paraeducators. We have a paraeducator, I believe now, in every one of our elementary schools. And that one teacher covers all the classes in that school. In some cases, we have a primary teacher, a paraeducator who has to be shared by 2 different elementary schools. If we were to add enough paraeducators to have one in every one of those kindergarten and first and maybe second grade classrooms, right off the bat, you're talking about a bunch of teachers, paraeducators. Well, are they important? Well, the problem is if Paul is a student and he's having a hard time and he's got to learn something and the teacher's occupied, when you have a paraeducator there, that paraeducator can sit down and solve that problem for that student right then and there. And if he doesn't get it solved then, it doesn't get solved. Well, maybe next year it'll be a problem. So what I'm trying to suggest to you, as we look at our budget, we're talking about needs, and Jim is here, has said, outlined some of those things. The needs that I'm talking about here, they're here, but they don't show up in our calculations. You don't see them. You alluded to some of your questions, Chris, precisely. And so when we think about educating, and Jim was just talking a minute ago about teacher salaries, you know who we have to compete with? We compete with Fairfax, and we compete with Arlington when we're hiring teachers. And that's a dilemma. So if we have enough salary to work with, we do a better job. So this is all in the background as our superintendent puts a budget together, as he's trying to figure out what do we need right now, what would we really like to have, and what do we dream about? I mean, you got all of these things. So I want to say that all of us, I know, appreciate the work that the board does. And you've done a good job financially, as I can look at. I'm not the numbers as my colleague here is, but you have done, and so we're very pleased with that in all honesty, and we respect you for that, and we respect you for the background and the backing that you have given us, too. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else?
If it could, Mr. Taylor, if we could get county staff to look into the school security officer. I know we looked at the legislation of it. What's the availability of those folks? Because I know it's not like hiring somebody to be a mall security guard. They got to have special training. How easy is it to find those people? That may be a workforce that's hard to. If we need to, if we were to hire 20 of those people, I don't know that we could find them. So I don't know if there's a way to check to see the availability of how those people with that training or what.
We can look into it. Dr. Baker may have some information, because my comprehension, and check me on this, Dr. Baker, is that school security officers would, I believe, be employees of the division. Okay. SROs, school resource officers, are deputies that are employees of the sheriff's office, although they are, in that designation, fully dedicated to the school. So they are, in practical effect, school staff, though they work for the sheriff and are funded through his budget.
I understand, Mr. Benton, where you're coming from with it being a cost savings, but are those people available to us?
Let me actually, I think there's a third category I think that you might be alluding to, but Mr. Taylor was exactly correct in terms of we have 2 school security personnel, we call them officers, at each of our high schools, and they are unarmed security that we employ and have for a number of years. There is a bill that was passed recently. I believe it might have been Mr. Cole's. Last year, yeah. So I think you're referring to the availability of retired law enforcement that could be allowed to carry and be in a role of security in the schools. And I don't want to, again, if the sheriff were here, I would have him address it. I think in just our conversations, and he would be able to shed a lot more light on it. I think if we went to that type of approach, whether there was a great availability or still few, but we were still able to, I think they would still be employed and trained through the sheriff's office. And I think that the sheriff, do not want to put words in his mouth, would have to share what he believes would be the better investment, whether it would be to have retired law enforcement who would be a security officer and what that would look like versus, I know he's and we both are very supportive and appreciative of the SRO program and the level of training and the investment into the training and what that yields in terms of the security level that can provide. And I think, as other folks have alluded to, the many other things it provides in terms of relationships and a sense of working with the entire school body. But I don't think it's impossible that happen. I just am imagining if they are armed and they're going to be trained, that they would be sheriff's office employees, yeah.
Yeah, what I was talking about would not be. And then I think it was copied to you.
Yeah, I read it. That's why I was
asking. I didn't finish reading it, so I just found it today and was reading through everything, trying to get a grasp of it, but it did not. It does not have to be a former law enforcement. It certainly has that in there, but there are some specific training that would be required for those individuals to have and take, which probably wouldn't be difficult with the Criminal Justice Academy down the road to maneuver some of that. So that, I mean, this is just things to think about. Like I say, when you're talking about deputies with middle school and high school, they can interact better in the older ages and actually take some action. Usually those younger ages of elementary school, I mean, For them, other than to be a presence, I really find it hard that they're really going to have to interject themselves in discipline and stuff that goes on within the school as far as criminal activities as much as the middle and high school. So that's what I was getting at. And I think it'd be something just to look at. You're the one's going to decide who comes in your schools and who don't, or who does not. Sorry for the language.
If I could share, and I know that last night the board was provided a presentation. I took, by the way, Mr. Bent, I took speech. I was pulled out for speech services when I was in elementary school. The staff provided a presentation to the school board last night on really the last 5 years, and really began with a response that occurred between the county and the school division, including the sheriff's department and other county personnel after Sandy Hook. And that task force formed a number of recommendations that would be both on the sheriff's department side as well as the school division side. And we talked about things like the enhanced entrances or the more secure entrances that have been done through maintenance. Really, believe it's 24 that have been done over the last 5 years. But one of the things that we intend to do, we have continued to meet quarterly with the sheriff's department. Certain teams have met quarterly to just review our progress, and also to review or debrief certain situations that we've managed that are a little more large scale, crisis type situations, so that we can continue to improve. Because of what occurred a month ago, we are going to reinstitute the security task force and go back through an analysis process. And I think a lot of what has been brought up this evening is going to be a part of that discussion, is where do we now need to look at in terms of investments and cooperation to continue to enhance security. And I think that whether it's an increase in school resource officers, whether it's additional security personnel that are armed, and perhaps additional security personnel that are unarmed. And I'm not a security expert from the perspective of, particularly from the armed perspective, but it's been said several times tonight, and I just can't let this moment go by without saying that interaction with students, school-wide security efforts are critical for us. We can't view anybody who is working as part of a security team, which really, in essence, becomes every single person in a school. We can't have anyone disconnected. They all have to be a part of crisis planning and in the know in terms of a number of things reasonably that go on in the school in order to be able to enact a plan and to react when certain things occur. But what was said about trying to solicit more volunteers to be a part of mentoring our students, to have more counselors, to have more mental health supports coming into the schools. I know that doesn't always sound like security, but the more adults we have, and I recall a recent roundtable that a couple members of our staff participated in with Dave Bratt, and I was reading a couple of the recommendations. Some have been mentioned at this table this evening, but one was love as a strategy to enhance safety and security. And so I don't want this moment to pass without, and that can also include additional administrators. We have administrative interns in this proposal. And all those eyes and ears and folks that form relationships both with students and parents can make a difference, we believe, in making our buildings more safe and more secure.
It, if I may recall correctly, and this dated back to prior to the Liz Silva situations that the county went through, and when we had the shooter on 95, that in cooperation with the sheriff's department, radios were set up, that with every school principal, every bus driver on their bus has a radio that communicates And those drivers have eyes and ears, and they can be 1 second in a communication for if they see something or hear something. With the amount of video cameras that we now have on the buses, we have an enhanced security tremendously. That when a student acts up in a bullying situation, that is recorded and it's acted upon. So that, you know, this county has been very proactive in that sense of trying to be prepared for situations so that our drivers, our principals, administrators in every school, and have the ability to be able to communicate. And those radios act as GPS, and those radios talk direct to dispatch, so that if there is a situation, that communication is instantaneous. And there was a lot of resources that were put to that effort, and it takes a lot of resource to maintain those radios too. It's not a cheap one, and those things are fairly expensive, but they are very useful. I know I carried what's called a brick for quite a few years, for 20-some years, and it definitely works. And we've had, you know, situations where it needed to be. So I think, you know, the county has been very proactive in that sense, and we're just continuing to expand on those kind of roles as to how can we improve those communications. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Anybody else? And y'all feel free to hit us with questions too. This isn't a one-way street. If you have anything for us, please feel free to let them roll.
Mr. Benton, I mentioned, I think when we had the opportunity to meet, and I just want to, while we're discussing joint ventures moving forward, I want to extend, as you all are looking at I noticed having a retreat and considering your long-term plans strategically. We are, as much as we talk about our current strategic plan and what results we've realized through that process, we are next year going to be engaged in looking at a new or a revised 6-year plan. And so I just mentioned that as we are going through that, if there would be a desire for anyone on the board or the staff to be a part of some joint representation as we form goals, as we review our mission, vision, and core values, having some dialogue in terms of finding where we might align strategically as far as long-term goals. I think I just extend that invitation, knowing that that can also make a big difference when we're considering future budgets, and especially years from now, that we all kind of look at the same things in terms of goals. And I know, for example, economic development being one of those goals. We have it from a different angle, but we certainly could look at ways that we can partner to do that. I also want to thank Mr. Taylor. I know he and his staff met with some of mine recently to look at how we currently work together in the area of procurement. And I think we're looking, and I appreciate his efforts and good ideas as far as how to operationalize what we currently do so that it can be understood moving forward, so that we know what we do now before we can determine how that can be enhanced. And so I just wanted to share that in closing.
I appreciate it, because it's, I mean, anytime we can have dialogue and conversation, you know, as long as we have decorum and treat each other's opinions and ideas with respect and dignity, there's no way we can go wrong. You know, the more we converse and the more we talk about and discuss about topics that concerns, number one, it gives clarity on both sides, I think, to the needs of each. And I just don't think there's a lose to it at all. Go ahead.
Greg, that is the Board of Supervisors, is interested in having the right companies move to town to work here. So you're always interested in economic development. And one of the areas that employers look at, first of all, before they do anything, is what? They say, what are the schools like down there? Good school? If Amazon should move to this area, 50,000 people or whatever they're talking about, how many would come here? Well, that number one question is going to be, what are they like? And one of the things that is so important today is choice. And the more choice that schools offer to the general government or general population, the more attractive it is. And we are do a great service in that area. We have a governor's school that is celebrating this year its 20th anniversary. In fact, one of you, I think Wanda Parrish, that was here, works with you. Anyway, her daughter just was admitted, she told me as I walked in. We have an international baccalaureate program, different kind of program. Again, both of those tend to be for the more gifted children as against the the kids with educational needs. The whole career and technical education area nationwide is going to receive additional emphasis for the next many, many years. About 22% of all jobs require a college degree. Others don't have it, but they need certification. They need a whole variety of instructional and academic and preparatory backgrounds. And our career and tech ed area is growing, and we're cognizant of what is necessary. And, you know, if we were to sit down and if you were to say, here's some money, what would you like to do with it? And we said it was career and tech education, we could spend a lot of money right now, tomorrow. Absolutely. One figure I saw recently, about 20,000 jobs existed for kids who had that kind of a background, and there are not enough kids to meet those jobs needs, and they start off at a salary of $80,000 a year. And it had nothing to do with college. And that's one of the things that we offer, so the folks who are in community development, you can brag about this school division. We do very well. And for that, we owe you all a real debt of gratitude, as well as our staff.
Appreciate it. Anybody else have any comments? I think you have some business to do as far as closing your board, but I just thank y'all again for, I just can't thank you enough. I know we all get bombarded with all these questions and stuff each year, and I don't see it getting any better. Hopefully it'll calm down a little bit, but you know, it's part of the learning process and understanding each other. And I'd be privileged to be a part of one of those committees if you'd have me. My wife would probably kill me hearing me want to participate in something else, but especially with the number of kids we have. But I'd definitely do it. Ms. Graham?
Motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn by Ms. Shelley, second by Mr. Braswell. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 7-0.
Scheduled for 6:30. Amy is retrieving the sheet. Do we have folks signed up, Amy? Rules were covered previously, Mr. Chairman. Who's signed up first, Amy?
There are two speakers signed up. The first is Megan Jackson, followed by Dale Swanson.
As a reminder, the yellow light comes on when you have 30 seconds to sum up. The red light comes on, the mic will be turned off. Please state your name and voting district for our record.
Yes, sir. Good evening. My name is Megan Jackson, and I live in the Lee Hill District. I'm speaking on behalf of all kids in Spotsy schools. I spoke for the first time at the last meeting that you all had. I spoke last night at the school board meeting, and I'm back tonight to address the topic again of school safety. And I would just like to comment that I appreciate all the discussion that has gone on tonight in regards to this matter. Just a quick refresher on who I am. I'm a mother to 4 awesome kids. They're well-behaved, respectful, good-hearted kids. I work 24/7 to make sure I'm raising good people and outstanding members in society. In addition, I do everything I can to keep them safe. I choose to send them to public schools, and I'm trusting in the Spotsylvania County school system to keep them safe while in their care. It's very disturbing to even have to consider homeschooling just because of school threats and school shootings. In the previous meeting, I offered a combination of suggestions to better ensure the safety in our schools, and with the suggestions come the talk of money, which is where the county comes in. I know that nothing is 100%, but I really do believe that there are steps that we can take to reduce these incidences. Attention to mental health, more counselors, more social workers, and a psychologist in all schools. Doing so, I do believe would help to get a handle on the bullying too. Bullying is not what it used to be, because bullying continues when kids leave home and it's done online, which brings me to another point of having some type of app or hotline that the students can access to report anything that is suspicious. And solutions to protect them from harm during school would include remodeling the structures, metal detectors, at least at the high school level, or possibly, I don't know if this is possible, bringing in a canine to do a daily hall sweep in conjunction with students being obligated to carry only clear backpacks. I'm not sure why we're not doing that. And then obviously the need for more officers, whether it is private armed security, if there is a lack of officers, and I do know that that's available. My husband did it for many years. I just beg for swift action on these matters. And the likelihood of certain things happening in the elementary school level, it is a lot lower, but we still need an officer there, and if nothing ever happens, then they're doing their job, and that's great. Also, I did create a survey. I don't have as much response as I would like yet, but parents who did fill it out are interested in actually having their taxes raised slightly to cover these. So I don't know if that's possible, but it is something to take into consideration. And nobody wants to pay more taxes, so I think it shows how much people care about this. And just to close up, I'm not going anywhere until I see these changes made. It's time to wake up now before tragedy occurs in this county. I hate to say it, but it will happen again. We just don't know when or where. Thank you.
Dale Swanson.
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Dale Swanson, and I live in the Cortland voting district. I am speaking as a property owner, a taxpayer, a senior citizen of Spotsylvania County. My opinions and facts and conclusions are my own, so please don't try to tie me to an organization. I would like to take a moment to thank the conservative members serving on the board, Mr. McLaughlin, Ross, Trampy, and Benton, for working hard to keep our taxes low while effectively delivering the core government services. Under your leadership, Spotsylvania County has much to be proud of. I would also like to thank the members of our CBRC for their outstanding job they are doing and ask that the board do a better job of treating them with the respect they deserve. It's a very hard job, and they are being unfairly treated, Mr. Yakubowski. My property assessments are up, so even if you equalize the rate, my taxes will substantially go up, as many of other properties in the county. A spirit of love was mentioned tonight. Well, I don't think it's very loving to overtax senior citizens, and there's many seniors in this county that are talking about having to sell their property as it is. So that's not a spirit of love. So I would like you to think about the seniors that live in this county. We have more elderly people in this county that have grown up here, that have lived here, that love this county, that have supported this county, and they want to die here. So please don't raise our taxes to the point that we can't live here anymore. I would ask the conservative on the board and those that claim to be conservative, with a $9 million surplus, how can you justify to anyone a higher tax rate than an equalized one? $21 million over the next 3 years in teachers' raises when the Evergreen study clearly shows that teachers are at market pay and some are above. How can you justify $21 million more in raises? I respectfully ask that you hold the line and vote for the equalized rate this year. Thank you so much.
There are no other citizens signed up to speak.
Is there anybody that doesn't? Come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Justin Langridge. I'm speaking tonight as president of the Spotsylvania County Professional Firefighters Association, IAFF Local 3886. Our office is located at 9835 Courthouse Road. Also, I'm a taxpayer and voter in the Lee Hill District and a lifelong county resident. Tonight, I'm speaking on staffing and compensation needs yet again. I'm sorry that not all of the board members could be here tonight because not everything I say comes lightly. In order to support the move towards 24/7 ALS and baseline staffing in the county's 11 fire stations, a total of 21 full-time positions are required. Mr. Taylor's proposed budget included 6 of these, leaving a need for 15 additional full-time employees, which were priced out in the optional expense list included at the end of his presentation. Several of you have committed your support to funding all 21 positions with the FY19 budget, enough of you for a voting majority. Recently, I've heard interest in only half-year funding these positions. The 24/7 ALS and baseline staffing is a topic that we've been speaking with you all about for several years. And I want to be clear that we are genuinely appreciative of the fire chief's pursuit and the board's support on this matter. Whether we go with half-year funding or full-year funding, it would be very, very appreciated if we could hear public commitment from the board in advance of the public hearing. I know that treating every county employee equally is a concern, so please note that my members are the only ones who are forced to remain at work after a full 24-hour shift due to staffing shortages. We will see continued attrition. In addition to junior employees only hired within the past couple of years, you have several highly experienced mid-level officers currently in application processes. Compensation. Some members of the board have indicated to me that they supported closing out the Evergreen compensation study in its second year, yet we've seen no public dialogue among you all. Some of you have acknowledged the study's shortcomings and acknowledged the need for a specified salary progression system, but have dismissed the ability to move forward, blaming a lack of support from other members of the board. If everyone who has told me they support a 2-year implementation voted in favor, you have a majority. So please, where is the disconnect? Why isn't this being talked about? Chairman Benton, you asked county staff to present a 2-year implementation plan during last year's budget process, twice. They never brought that to you, at least not publicly. You say you never got it. Where is it? Regardless of 2 years or 3, I want to say very clearly tonight that the Evergreen report and the county's implementation has turned out somewhat depthless and is rife with omissions. It has not and will not appropriately fix the issues of salary compression, and in some cases has actually made it worse. In what seems to have been an effort to treat all departments equally, it has not addressed the glaring market value gaps. Despite what I believe to be Mr. Taylor and HR's best intentions, what is fair or equitable is not always equal. I can only speak from the vantage point of my members, but the compensation adjustments recommended by Evergreen and county staff are still only a Band-Aid or a repair to what deserves a greater overhaul in order to successfully recruit and retain individuals the way our community deserves. Our members deserve to be compensated appropriately with the market. You're still only patching a leaking roof. It's time for a new roof. During the school board conversation, or joint session, there was some conversation about catch-up. We're catching up. I wish Dr. Baker and the schools the best of luck with their own evergreen implementation. I hope that the additional time taken for their study has allowed for a more thorough and successful strategy. Thank you.
Is there anybody that did not come on, Oscar?
Yes, my name is Scott Cook. I live at 10818 Catharpin in the Livingston District, and I back up what Ms. Swanson said. I'm not interested in leaving here. I don't want you to run me off, and I need you to keep your taxes so that I can afford to stay here in Spotsylvania. The equalized rate is high enough, but it's fine. It's certainly not going any lower than that, I understand, but this increase, especially for the runaway school system, has got to stop. I'm all in favor of educating the kids, but they come to the board every year. They need more and more and more, and if you gave them all that they wanted, next year they'd want some more. So they need to work with what you give them, and the school board needs to remember that they're elected by the taxpayers. They're not appointed by the PTA or Dr. Baker or anybody else. They're elected by the taxpayers, and so they need to stick up for the taxpayers, and I thank you.
Is there anybody else that did not sign up that wishes to speak at this time? We'll close public presentations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Informational materials are provided in your packet. I had nothing else to report at this time. We do have closed session and any report from Carl.
No report.
Move to closed session.
This will be your resolution to adjourn into closed meeting. Whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn into closed meeting for discussion or consideration of the acquisition of real property for a public purpose or the disposition of publicly held real property where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body, specifically discussion of real property in the Berkeley District and discussion of real property in the Livingston District. And whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn into closed meeting for discussion concerning a prospective business or industry or the expansion of an existing business or industry, where no previous announcement has been made of the businesses or industry's interest in locating or expanding its facilities in the community, specifically healthcare industry and defense contractors. And whereas Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn into closed meeting for a consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff members or consultants pertaining to actual or probable litigation, where such consultation or briefing in open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the public body, specifically regarding a human resources matter, a law enforcement matter, and a contractual matter. And whereas pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2, 3711A, 3, 5, and 7, such discussions may occur in closed meeting. Now therefore be it resolved that the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors does hereby authorize discussion of the aforestated matters.
So moved. Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
Chair's aye. I waited till the last to do this fumble, so.
Has convened a closed meeting on this day pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2, 3712D of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law, now therefore be it resolved that the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors hereby returns to open meeting and certifies by roll call vote that to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from the open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act and identified in the motion to convene in closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting.
I'll switch directions. Mr. Marshall?
Aye, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I was saying something else.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Chair, aye.
Mr. Chair, at this time, I would respectfully request a motion to add 2 items to the agenda. They are amendments to the incentive agreements with HDT and PAE, 2 contractors that have previously entered into incentive agreements with the county and require your consideration for amendments there too. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Taylor, who will introduce both of those, and we need to get a board vote on each one separately.
Okay.
We're going to separate vote to add them to the agenda, Carl.
Yeah, the first vote will be to add them to the agenda, then the 2 votes, or a vote on each of them, so 3 total.
Okay.
Okay. As to HDT, this would be it's entitled First Amendment to Performance Agreement, and this is an amendment to the performance agreement dated January 26th of 2017 between the County of Spotsylvania and HDT Expeditionary Systems, Inc., a Delaware corporation. Second is an amendment to performance agreement also between the County of Spotsylvania, Virginia, and PAE National Security Solutions, LLC, and that is amending a performance agreement dated June 19 of 2014. Those are my descriptions.
Move to add them to the agenda.
All right, we have a motion by Dr. Trampy to add them to the agenda. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
And the chair's aye. Amy, did you get all that? All right. Now we need a motion to...
Motion to approve, please, the First Amendment to the performance agreement between the County of Spotsylvania and HDT Expeditionary Systems, Inc., a Delaware corporation, amending the performance agreement dated January 26th of 2017.
So moved.
A motion by Dr. Trampy. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
Chair's aye.
Second is an amendment to the performance agreement between the County of Spotsylvania, Virginia, and PAE National Security Solutions, LLC, amending a performance agreement dated June 19 of 2014.
So moved.
All right, motion by Dr. Trampy. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy?
Aye.
And Chair, aye.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes your business for the evening. Motion to adjourn would be in order.
Motion by Mr. Yakubowski. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No nays.